Welcome, everybody. I know folks will continue to trickle in here, but I wanted to say hello and welcome and kick things off. For those who don't know me, my name is Cody Semrau, and I'm the founder and CEO of BetterMynd, an online therapy platform for college students. I grew up in Rochester, New York, about an hour down the road from where I am now, living in Buffalo, where I've been for the past 4 years, living with my partner John and our 13-year-old Westy Max. So I don't know if we have any Bills fans out there, but go Bills. But I'm truly honored to have you all here today for this inaugural Beyond Titles conversation. We're incredibly grateful to have such an amazing group of leaders and visionaries to hear today from our very special guests. So the goal of this series is really just to learn from some of higher education's most transformative leaders and discuss how they navigate challenges, lead with purpose, and create meaningful change on their campuses. So we hope that today's conversation leaves you all feeling just a little bit motivated and inspired. But quickly, for those who may not be familiar with BetterMynd, we are an online mental health and therapy platform that partners directly with colleges and universities across the country to expand and supplement the impact of their on-campus counseling services. As many of you know, mental health and the issues faced by students have only continued to rise over the last decade, and of course with COVID. And today is the number two reason why students pause their education and stop out. And for me, the mission of what we're doing is personal. Is I was a college student a little over 10 years ago now, when I experienced my own mental health challenges and dealing with anxiety and depression and really starting to question my will to live. I was fortunate that my school had a counseling center, but the fear and shame and the stigma kept me from accessing that help until I had hit rock bottom. So this experience made me realize there's a lot of other students out there going through similar challenges and ultimately, wanting to get students help when they need it the most, regardless of how they get there. So in 2017, I founded BetterMynd, and 7 years and a pandemic later, our vision remains the same, that, no student should be left behind to struggle with mental health. But that's it for us. That's all. It's not about us today. So with that, we'd love to jump in and welcome our first fireside chat guest. This is the first in a series of conversations that we'll be hosting with thought leaders in higher ed. And kicking off today, we have the remarkable guest, Dr. Nicolle Parsons-Pollard. So thank you, Nicolle, for joining us today.
Thank you,
Nicolle,
Cody.
absolutely. Well, quick background, Nicolle is the Provost and EVP of Academic Affairs at Georgia State University. And what truly distinguishes her is her forward-thinking approach and leadership in higher ed. With a career spanning decades, Nicolle has championed transformative initiatives in faculty development, student success, and diversity and inclusion. And under her leadership, Georgia State has emerged as a national leader, particularly in fostering students' success for first-gen students, creating a campus culture that balances academic rigor and student well-being. But beyond the impressive accolades, what I admire most about Nicolle is her ability to lead with both strategic vision and compassion. So it's a true honor to have you here today, Nicolle. Welcome, and I'm excited to dive into the conversation. But would you mind just saying hello to the audience and sharing anything about yourself that you'd like?
Well, thank you again, Cody, for having me here. This is an extremely important conversation. And so I am delighted to be your inaugural speaker, and I look forward to all of the other sessions that will be coming up as well. Um, I tell people all the time, I ended up in higher education almost by accident. I was in graduate school, and someone asked me to teach a first year transition course. And as a matter of fact, I went on the job interview and didn't even realize it was an interview. And it was felt like a conversation. And the next thing I know, I was teaching the course. And the upside is I didn't know that they were going to actually pay me until someone called me 3 weeks in and they said, "You've got to come and fill out your I-9 so that we can pay you." And I said, "Oh my goodness, you're going to pay me to do this?" Because I loved those students. And so from that moment, I decided that that was what I was going to devote my career to doing, and have enjoyed every single minute of it. But even despite all of that, I could not have dreamt the dream of Georgia State. And I am so completely excited about being here, being in Atlanta, and being in an institution like we are.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Nicolle. And it's a pleasure to have you here. But before we get into some of the deeper topics, we've got, I'd love to start on a lighter note and ask if you've picked up any new hobbies, skills, or sort of activities as of late.
So, interestingly enough, I started taking tennis lessons. I am the only person in my family who cannot play. And so instead of just sort of standing on the sidelines, I decided to go ahead and take up some lessons. And so that's been a great way to, as I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit later, it's a great way to one, to be outside and to get some exercise. And it takes my mind off of other things, which is oftentimes what we all need.
Love that. Love tennis. Great way to exercise and get out there. Do you watch the major championships at all?
I've watched some of them, but the highlight was I was able to travel to Paris to the Olympics, and I actually got to see Nadal play. And so that is nothing tops that right now.
That is pretty awesome. I'm definitely jealous. Well, great. Well, I guess now we can jump into our first topic, where I wanted to start off by asking you more generally about your overall leadership philosophies. And, as a leader of a small company myself, someone who struggled with mental health, I feel like it's powerful to have a guiding principle, something to guide you when things are feeling chaotic. So I'm curious, when it comes to your leadership philosophy, what that is and what your North Star is really guides you.
So I'm really fortunate because my North Star, I get to sort of live out daily as far as my work is concerned. Years ago, I wrote down a mission statement, and I revisit it every now and then to see if it still applies. But it was a simple statement, which was to change the world through education. Again, how I found myself in education was by happenstance. But what I did know is what having a college education did for me, for my family, for their trajectory. And I do believe that this is still one of the ways in which we can change people's lives. And while some of that is about financial opportunities and social mobility, some of that is also just about how we think and how we see the world around us. And education is key to being able to do that. And so that has sort of been my North Star. Again, I'm fortunate that my North Star really does align with the work that I get to do every day. But what I can say is that um, your sole purpose is to figure out what your gift is, and then to sort of get busy utilizing that gift to make the world a better place. And in order to be able to do that, it might be through your work, it might be through your volunteerism or philanthropy, it might be through your religious organizations, but each of us has that. And each of us is able to find a way in order to shape the world around us.
Love that. It's great finding your passion and making an impact on the world. When challenges come your way, things may feel overwhelming, whether it's, institutional pressure or personal. How do you stay anchored yourself to your North Star and, you know, support your own mental health and wellness?
I know for one of the things for me is to get quiet. And what I mean is actually physically, but also mentally. Oftentimes, part of that pressure that you might be feeling or the uneasiness comes from what I consider to be white noise, other people's opinions, other people's thoughts, sometimes your own inner thoughts. And while some people meditate, some people pray, some people walk, I always wanted to be one of those people who could like go on a run and then come back with a fresh mind. But I'm not quite that person. But whatever it is for you, what I found for me is that it had something to do with being still. And something about stillness allows you to be able to see things more clearly and in a way in which they really are versus how they might feel or how other people want you to see them. And so I have sort of my natural personality is to sort of get stuff done. And so being able to be still really does some days feel like a superpower for me because it is the antithesis of how I normally respond to things. And so for me, that's been one of the ways.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I'm definitely a big fan of mindfulness and meditation myself, and creating your own calm in the chaos. So, well, I know you've been at Georgia State for, is it 5 years now? It's been longer.
No, four, out
Four.
four.
Okay.
Yeah.
Only four, but I know you've even in that time successfully navigated complexities and that throughout your career. And I'm curious how you balance the demands of students, faculty, and staff, the immediate demands of today in comparison to, the long-term vision of where you want to take, the university.
Um, so sometimes that's really difficult because there are certain things that are always sort of coming at you. And our natural inclination is to deal with the things that are most immediate. Um, Anyone who knows me knows I love to write a list. About every 3 months or so, I decide to reorganize my list. And it's just a way also, if you feel bogged down, one of the things you can do is write it down. Sometimes it floating around in your head actually makes it seem more challenging than it actually is. And so being able to sort of write it out gives me a way to one, to be able to manage it and to prioritize it. But the part about the tactical things that sort of take away time from the more strategic thinking is that we have to actually plan that. I think people believe that you can just sort of make that happen, but there will always be things to jump in front of that. And for many of us, what we put on our calendar, what we choose to do are the things that actually get done. And so I actually carve out time to think, which seems so ridiculous, but it is absolutely necessary. And I just told a relative of mine the other day that email is not work. Email is oftentimes the thing that is stopping you from getting things done. And so for some people, constantly responding and replying to those things, you have to manage that as well. Otherwise, you will get bogged down with all of the tactical things and not be able to sort of do the visioning that you want to do and the more strategic thinking, which is why people have some of their best ideas while they're in the shower, taking a walk, or doing something that just lets your mind sort of wander. And so that's sort of what I definitely try to do. But certainly carving out some time for it is also extremely helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And do you have tips for prioritizing
Um,
generally?
there are all these things out there about like what's urgent and important, and what's important but not urgent, and those kinds of things. And if you really sort of sit down and you kind of categorize them, you will realize that oftentimes you're doing things that are less important but feel urgent. Um, so all of us have one of these attached. Everybody's got this within hand's reach, right? And so if a text message comes up, is that urgent? Sometimes it feels urgent when you pick your phone up immediately to deal with it, but it might not actually be really important. And so if you do the unimportant things that feel urgent enough times during the day, you will find that you have lost time. And so I think the being clear about how to prioritize things also helps you to be able to manage your time a little bit better as well. And then that also gives you some ease. I know sometimes I'll take something home with me to work on, and sometimes I will purposely take something that's I need to do, but it was really less important. Maybe I can do it in front of the television or something like that. There are those kinds of moments. And then there are the things that I drive back and forth from home to work. And I know I'm not the only person on this call that puts things in your bag to do when you get home and then you don't do them and you drive them back to work. But that also tells you how important it was that you could delay it. And
Mhm.
so in thinking about those kinds of things, those are helpful.
Yeah, those are all great points. Well, I guess, switching topics here a little bit, but talking about, sort of the outside pressures that come when you're leading an institution. I know that higher education leaders are increasingly tasked with navigating, not just the internal challenges of the school, but those external social and political pressures. So I know that these pressures, and we've seen it create tension on campuses throughout the past year or two and beyond. But I'm curious how you, as a provost, navigate those external political and social pressures that can often conflict or make it more challenging to achieve your broader mission and goals.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a great question for sort of where we find ourselves today. One of the things that sort of I have to constantly remember is that um, higher education and being on a college campus is being in a place where you value a marketplace of ideas. And when that is indeed the case, you will have protests, you will have differing opinions, you will have the moments where you find yourselves and people having difficult conversations. One of the things that I found is most important is because I started Georgia State in the Office of Faculty Affairs, and I came in July of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. There were no vaccines. People were standing out in line. You couldn't get PPE. You were trying to still fold a scarf to put around your face and those kinds of things. We didn't know very much about the so many feet away and for how long. And we were all just trying to figure it out. One of the things that I've noticed about getting through those tough moments is that you have to have built up trust already. So open communication and being transparent is important, and it's most important when it feels like you don't need it, when things are good, because it gets tested when the challenges actually come. And people have to remember who you've been the entire time and hope that you will continue to be that person through the challenging times. There's also building partnerships internally and externally. I can, the University System of Georgia, being able to call there for advice, to be able to talk to other people within the system at other institutions becomes valuable and important. Working with people who are on the cabinet with me. I can remember during some of the conversations about DEI and politics and really leaning on my colleague who is in the government affairs office, and his expertise and his knowledge were extremely helpful in allowing me to be able to communicate and with the faculty and others about where things were going. And so, but definitely the other part is, you know, my role is always to advocate for Georgia State. It's to advocate for our students, our faculty and staff, and to ensure that their voices are heard through me oftentimes and through the president and through other people who sit on the cabinet. And so that requires me to listen as well. And so I think that's part of what we've all sort of been trying to do as we feel ourselves moving from one challenging moment to another challenging moment.
Love that. Helping you stay grounded and developing those partnerships
Yeah.
across campus before you need them even. So I know that there was a recent survey where 65% of college students, expressed stress or anxiety about the upcoming election in a couple of months here. And I'm curious if you have any other, thoughts, advice for leaders who are managing, the current climate and that sort of tension on campus?
Um, First of all, I think it's important to know your campus. Um, some of us have different challenges depending upon the campus culture that you have. And sometimes the national news will lead you to believe that you will have the same challenges as some other institution is having. And that's not necessarily the case. So you really have to know your population of students and faculty and other staff because it can be very different. We have 6 different campuses. And even across those campuses, the culture of each of those is very different. And so in the downtown campus, there are indeed challenges that the campus in Dunwoody does not have. And so ensuring that when you are seeking to communicate about some of these things that are occurring, understanding who you're talking to and how they are perceiving the situation, I think is extremely important. I think the other thing is that we often forget, as I said earlier, that university campuses have always been where we take challenging times and challenging topics and we have a discourse about them. And so, whether it was the Vietnam War or apartheid in the 80s, which I remember very clearly, to the Black Lives Matter movements, there has to be space for dialogue. And part of what we attempt to create for students is ability to be able to critically think and to be able to have the kinds of conversations that you need to in order to face the challenges that you see beyond you. I knew that this topic would sort of come up in our discussion. And if you don't mind, I'd like to share a quote with you because I go to it very often to sort of remind myself. And the quote's by Bell Hooks. And some of you probably know this. She says, "The academy is not paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created. The classroom, with all of its limitations, remains a location of possibility. In the field of possibility, we have the opportunity to labor for an openness of mind and heart that allows us to face reality even as we collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries, to transgress. This is education as the practice of freedom." That reminds me of our purpose. And it reminds me also that the challenges that students today face um, echo the ones that students of the past have faced as well.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, that's a great reminder and a great passage. Thank you for sharing that. Well, when it comes to mental health and well-being and student retention, I know it's something that we believe are deeply connected at BetterMynd. And I'm curious about some of the initiatives you have enacted on campus there to support the mental health of, both students and faculty and staff.
If we could say that there was anything that came out of the pandemic, it was one, our ability to do exactly what we're doing now, getting to be able to speak to a number of people who are all in different places. And one of the things that also came out of the pandemic for us was the additional supports that we added for students. One of the resources is Together All, which is a fully online peer supported network. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Also, another app called Driven, which we've sort of rebranded as Panther Strong, which allows students to engage in brief reflections so that it can help them to manage life's challenges while being in college. And so, as we returned from the pandemic, we kept many of those things in place and then coupled them with our traditional mental health modalities, which were largely in person. And so, we believe that doing that gives our students the kinds of flexibility that they desire and really do need. And so, we've done several things that we think put sort of these resources at the touch of students, right at the tips of their hands. There's also something called Text Care. and allow students to connect with live health uh, health providers 24/7, 365 days. It does not shut down. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to integrate all of these things again with our own resources that are here, like our on-call response teams. And so I think what we have been able to do is really put together a complement of things that be able to help students as they have these challenges. And more importantly, it has not only allowed us to support students, but we have some data that shows it has increased retention and academic performance.
Mhm.
And lastly, we also have seen that there were some traditional demographics of students that would not engage in some of the services, in particular, Black males. And what we have found is once we started using the Together All, that they are the highest users of the online peer support. And so it really is about meeting students where they are and providing the information that they need at that time.
Great. Finding students with different options. So,
Mhm.
well, I'm curious, on a general higher ed landscape and at your college specifically, how the discussion at a leadership level has changed around mental health and how you feel like that's evolved over time.
Yeah. Um, I definitely think that the stigma has started to wane. Um, and I think it's because our expectation is that people do take care of their mental health and well-being. Having this conversation and not allowing it to be about someone who is is sick or needs not just assistance and support, but is in some way deficient in some way. And so the conversation has changed over time. And the more accessible the conversation becomes, the less the stigma is. And so being able to do that has happened over a number of years. And when I was in college, we would not have been having this conversation. And the supports that an institution like a Georgia State provides were likely not in place during those times. And so students did struggle and did feel isolated and all of those things. And so my hope is that what we are doing today continues to grow long after I am gone and retired, and that eventually this becomes just a natural part of what we do for one another.
Mhm. That's great. Well, I know one of the challenges that we hear from counseling centers in particular that we work with is really developing, going beyond the silos of departments and really making a campus-wide culture of wellness as it, touches faculty and staff and it involves so many individuals on campus. So I'm curious, how, at GSU or other where you've seen mental health resources, become less isolated and been able to embed them. So the university feels, across the board a little bit more involved in developing this culture of wellness.
Mhm. I think one of the things, and Georgia State does this really well, is about how we approach things as far as organizational structure is concerned. And so right now we have an integrated team of professionals within the student engagement area. So we don't have the traditional silos. And so the areas are integrated and they're together. And so whether it's counseling and health services, access and accommodations, which we used to refer to as disability services, testing, psychiatric services, and student victim assistance. They're all there together, and not just organizationally, but also physically. And so we have created a space on the Atlanta campus in particular that puts them all together in what we refer to as a health hub. And that health hub allows students to be all of those services to be co-located, but also to have one singular virtual check-in and waiting area for all of them. Again, back to the stigma piece of it is that no one knows why You could be waiting for testing services. You could be waiting to see one of the doctors or one of the counselors. And so, again, allowing students to be able to share and be in those same spaces. There's also a university-wide campaign called Be Well Panthers. And there's an advisory and support team that is includes faculty, staff, students, other administrators, and community leaders. And they really do help to advise us to ensure that many of our mental and physical health, and including nutrition and recreational services, are embedded into the institutional culture. And so I think one of those things is to really pay attention to physical space as well as organizational structure.
Awesome. That's great. And it sounds like you've really been able to integrate, a lot of resources and departments at the university. For leaders who are maybe starting out at their school that are not currently integrated in that fashion, do you have any tips for them in getting there?
I think so. First of all, listening to things like this that where other institutions can share with you some of the things that they have done. I do know that oftentimes going to your professional network conferences and those kinds of things, they give us a great opportunity to have conversations with people who have been thinking about these things differently as well. And so I recommend all of those kinds of things. And, it's so interesting. I will get a random email from someone from another institution that maybe heard or saw something, and they want to come by because they're going to be in Atlanta, or they wanted to ask me some questions. If there's someone, an institution that you're thinking about, email your counterpart and ask them. I have never said no to one of those things, and I've never had anyone say no to me either. And so oftentimes just sharing what you've been doing or what someone else has shared with you is often the first step.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, great. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about, faculty development and workload management. And as I know, that's been a big topic since COVID as well. And that supporting students requires, supporting healthy faculty and staff. So I'm curious how you have addressed faculty burnout and workload management, at Georgia State, particularly, as we recover from the pandemic still.
Yes. Fortunately, Georgia State participates in Harvard's Coach Survey, which stands for Collaborative on Academic Careers in Higher Education. It's a mouthful, and I almost always forget it. It is indeed one of the gold standards for faculty satisfaction surveys. And this is our second administration of the survey. The first one, interestingly enough, was right before the pandemic. It was released in 2019 and ended in 2020. And so when we received the results, just as I was coming on board here, we had to socialize that information to make sure that the pandemic hadn't had some unintended consequences that made the things that people thought were important, less important, or other things eclipsed what they thought was important at the time when they took the survey. And what we did is we found that it held pretty strong even through the pandemic. And we came up with our first university action plan. We are in our second iteration of our action plan, but on both of those, one of the things that came up was faculty workload, and in particular, faculty workload as it relates to service. And so our Office of Faculty Affairs has started some programming around this. And one of the things they utilize is ACE's, the American Council on Education's recommendations in equity-minded workload. And we've had several sessions. There have been some departments who have adopted those practices. And where we see those practices having been adopted, we see some increases in satisfaction with the parity of work and the distribution of work in those areas. People are having more conversation and dialogue around faculty workload. And so in our second iteration, this particular action plan, we intend on increasing the number of departments that are going to be participating in doing this work.
Yeah.
Also recently, the Office of Faculty Affairs released their faculty wellness website. And it's a wonderful site that provides tools that are available to help do things like minimize stress, help people with mindfulness, and some overall advice on mental well-being. And I love the fact that, there will be some sessions and things that happen, but having the tools available and there online and people receiving the emails reminding them that it's there allows them to be able to engage in it on their own time. And so there are resources there that are extremely helpful, things like time management and setting boundaries. And so what we're attempting to do is to try to leave some tools and different things so that faculty can utilize these at their own discretion, but also have some things that are clearly expectations from my office, which is that we address workload and that we pay close attention to burnout. And there are some studies that show that it disproportionately impacts women faculty and faculty who are non-tenure track or assistant professors. And so those kinds of things concern me. And so I'm hoping that some of the work that we're doing and the conversations that we continue to have will be able to alleviate some of those concerns.
That's great. It sounds like you put a lot of thought and effort into, workload management for your staff and faculty. So
Hey, Cody, I'm going to jump in really quick because we
sure.
got a Q&A about faculty support that I wanted to jump in and while we're on this topic. Someone asked Dr. Parsons-Pollard, what are your recommendations for best supporting staff, particularly during this time in the same way that we were talking about students, especially around this election-related stress, war, student support, any kind of recommendations on staff-specific support on navigating the campus amongst all of these challenges?
Well, thank you for that question. We do spend a lot of time talking about students and student support. And with my background being in faculty affairs, spend a lot of time with that as well. And oftentimes, staff don't get as fully addressed in these conversations. So I'm glad that that topic has come up. Our area of human resources, we have a climate survey that is sent out every other year to staff so that we can gauge the kinds of supports that are needed for them. And that information is shared with other cabinet members so that the staff who work under academic affairs gets to engage in those concerns that were brought up just as much as those who work in other administrative areas and divisions across the campus. The other thing is that HR actually is been leaps and bounds beyond the rest of us in providing courses and workshops and trainings, all related to things like well-being. And then most recently, they started having some of them sort of during the lunch hour so that people could feel like they could have their lunch and listen. I can remember during the pandemic, I logged into one of them and I was surprised that there were mostly staff members on it and not faculty, because somehow faculty didn't sort of see themselves in this, but it was chair yoga. And it was perfect for the pandemic because what had we all done? We all came and we sat down at our dining room table or whatever, and you were on this thing all day long, sitting there. And it was to get us up and get us moving and get us talking about how things were going. And so I think that certainly engaging your human resources area, because that's how you reach staff across the entire institution, is valuable and important. And it's important for people who are in my role as provost and deans and department chairs to also hold the university accountable for ensuring that we do these things as well for staff members too.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for that question. All right. Well, shifting topics a little bit here and talking about just generally the future of education. I know a lot of us probably think about that given some of the things, enrollment cliffs and other things we think about. Of course, how the pandemic's changed education. And I'm curious just on your thoughts looking forward, what shifts you see as forthcoming, and how does, higher education stay, relevant and resilient in the future as student needs and societal expectations, continue to evolve?
Right. Well, thank you. I think this is probably one of the Chronicle of Higher Ed articles indicated that this is one of the low points of how people feel about higher education. Is it worth it? And what are the expectations that people have? And just today, my colleague sort of showed this in a presentation, some of the challenges that students can have as they go through college. Mental health and wellness was on there, along with financial concerns and those kinds of things. But at the end of it, there is supposed to be this holy grail of a thing waiting for you at the end. And what is that thing? What kind of job is that? What kind of career is that? And one of the things that I think we have to realize and recognize is that we don't know all of the things that will happen in the next 10 years. I looked up a couple of things. Um, Google is, I mean, it is a verb. Did you Google it? And it hasn't been around 30 years. Facebook, 20 years. Twitter, 18 years. And so who would have thought that those things would have existed in the manner in which they did, and that they would have such a strong foothold? Who would have thought that presidential candidates make announcements on Twitter? And so being able to see beyond that is not always the thing that we're capable of doing. But what we do know is valuable and important is things like lifelong learning, ensuring that we as institutions have flexible pathways to be able to support continuous education and to be able to increase skill development and both cater to traditional students as well as working professionals, people who want micro credentials in order to be able to get to that next role in their job or their position. Certainly integrating technology in everything that we do, not just the instruction, but the administration of it, hybrid and online learning as well. Um, and increasing also being mindful about mental health and making sure that those services and things are available to students. And then thinking about interdisciplinary approaches to things. When we marry technology with the humanities and or social services, social sciences, what does that mean? What kind of benefit do students get for those kinds of opportunities to learn? And so these are some of the conversations that we're having in higher ed, ensuring that students have more experiential learning opportunities. Um, you know, the world should actually be their laboratory and not just inside of the classroom. And you get opportunities to be able to do that with your external partners, whether it be governmental agencies or nonprofits or corporations. And then teaching our students how to use data, how to make data-driven decisions, because those are the kinds of things that impact policy and practices. And so needing them to understand that. And lastly, ensuring that they have a world view of the things that they are learning. That book that came out some years ago, The World is Flat, it certainly is. Our global connection to one another could not be stronger than it is today. And so we need to ensure that we're preparing students to be responsible global citizens as well. And so I think if we can focus on some of those things, people will start to see and understand the relevance more, and they will see that it goes beyond just the job that one has after they graduate, but the impact that they can have after they graduate.
Mm, Awesome. That was a great response. I love all the. Well, I know we're running short on time here, so I'm gonna do one final question and then see if we have any Q&A. But I'd love, I know you've been a leader a long time. I've certainly learned a lot in my short leadership journey so far, but I'm curious if you're still learning things and maybe something recently, a leadership lesson that you've learned or were surprised by to learn, even in your more experienced stages.
Not necessarily surprised by, but I do have some that I often share with people. And I usually start with the first leadership lesson I ever learned. After being a faculty member for quite some time, I went to work as an administrator in the provost office. And I always tell people I went to a faculty senate meeting. I had been a senator for a long time. And so I was used to sharing my ideas and my views about things. And I'm no longer on the Senate, but I go to the meeting and I have no idea what the topic was, but I am sharing. And I even said, this is my opinion. A couple of days go by, I go to work, and the provost says to me, Nicolle, did you tell the Senate that I said whatever it was? And I said, oh, no, sir. No. I told them those were my thoughts and my ideas. And that was my first lesson about being an administrator, is that my thoughts and ideas often translate into whatever the leader's thoughts and ideas are. So in my new role, my voice was not just my voice anymore because people paid attention to what I had to say because of my position in the organization. And I'm just thinking, oh, it's just little old me, it's just Nicolle. And so a few other things, if you don't mind me waxing on just a little bit, is also to do with listening. Because people listen to what you say, you need to really be careful about what you say. And the other part is listening to people. If you listen, people will normally tell you what they want, what they need, or what they expect. But you actually have to be listening. It's usually not that difficult, but you have to pay attention. A couple of other lessons. One, taking care of yourself, which is part of our conversation here. And that it means mentally and physically. You cannot be your best if you have not slept well and are eating well and doing other things that you need to do in order to be in your best physical and mental condition. And the last one is encouraging the people who report to you or you oversee to be their best selves. If you don't have any employees who ever leave and go on to do bigger and better things, then that means two things. You don't know how to select talented people. You have not cultivated them, and you have not been able to grow your network. And so the jobs that people hold and the people that we work with, it's not our job to hold on to people. It's our job to empower them so that they can go on to bigger and better things.
I love that. Well, thank you, Nicolle, for answering all of my questions and all of your sage advice here. Alex, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience.
No, we had a question that was really centered around what you already answered, Nicolle, in the sense of how do we navigate this new kind of climate and culture around folks questioning the value of higher ed? And so what does that look like for us to be able to be at the forefront to ensure that we're meeting our enrollment numbers, that folks feel like they have a sense of belonging at their institutions before they arrive on campus? And so I think it's speaking to that piece of how do we continue to talk about the value of higher ed for those who are thinking about entering into the institution, for those who are saying, I don't feel like it's worth it anymore.
Well, Dr. Paul, I don't know if you have anything else you'd want to add there, or I do have one final question I can ask you if we don't have any others.
Okay.
All right, well,
And
we're
somebody's
trying to.
hand is up also.
Oh, okay, great.
Just popped up on the screen.
Awesome. Do we have a question?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, Dr. Simpson.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted, first of all, it's more of a comment. I'm a Georgia State grad, so I wanted to say that's how proud I am of the university, how proud I am of what you've accomplished and what the president is accomplishing. You're all doing a really stellar job, the entire leadership at Georgia State. I am now in higher education as an administrator, and I'm interested in just knowing what your thoughts are on creating space for how do you mentor people who make mistakes, right? Because there's mistakes that are made. How do you professionally, as a supervisor, as a leader, provide constructive feedback that isn't the guillotine experience, right? Everyone is fearful of the guillotine experience. So how do you do that in a constructive way, that still provides encouragement and support, but also explains we are going in the wrong direction?
Well, first of all, hello, Panther. Thank you very much. We are very proud of you as well. One of the things that we try to pride ourselves on is also ensuring that we pour right back into higher ed, and we ensure that people who want to be in higher education get as many opportunities as possible in order to be able to do that as well. So happy to see you doing the work that you're doing. I think that mistakes are, as we know, a part of learning. You know, I remember telling a friend of mine that I went ice skating, and my remark was, and I didn't fall. And she said, then you weren't trying hard enough. And so, because you will fall. And so it depends on the gravity of the mistake. It also depends on the intention. There's a difference in not understanding something and making an error. And there's a very big difference in knowing exactly what you're doing or not doing and causing a similar error. And so I think, first of all, dealing with what the intention was, as well as ensuring that you explain to the person what the expectations actually were, and then assessing again. There are people always like, oh, with 3 strikes and you're out. Sometimes it's 1 strike. It really is, because there can be things that you do that are so severe that you don't get 2 more strikes. All of us are reporters in some way. You know, Title IX exists. So there are all these other constraints and things that we have to think about depending upon what the error was. But if it's your normal run-of-the-mill kind of thing, there is a process for re-engaging the person, ensuring that they understand what the expectations are, being really clear about that all as well, and then not demonizing them for having made an error, and then moving forward. But we all know also when something is intentional versus unintended as well, and they require different responses.
So thank you, Nicolle. Well, we may have time for one more if anybody out there has a question. If not, then I'll end it here with one final question, Nicolle. But I guess what's maybe something surprising about your leadership style that others might not expect?
That they might not expect, that I, and you know, which is really dovetails with the question about making mistakes. I think I can appear to be very no nonsense, and then when someone does something in particular, I tend to try to mentor them through the problem rather than taking a really harsh stance about it. And I'm not sure if people would necessarily think that that would be sort of my personality or not, but that's what I think.
Well, a lot of great answers today. I know I learned a lot and really appreciate you taking the time today and just for all the great work, you've done throughout your career and continue to do. So thank you so much, Nicolle, for kicking this series off with us today.